Welcome everybody today to the Liturgy of the Chalice. Thank you so much for coming, and a warm welcome to those who might see us for the first time online. Today we're going to have a talk about part 2 of Mar Yeshua's inner Halakah, or his teachings for purifying the heart and the mind of his disciples, past, present, and future. Inner Halakah of Mar Yeshua. So in continuation of last week's Liturgy of the Chalice talk, we're going to talk about more elements of Mar Yeshua's teachings for purifying the heart and the mind of his disciples. It is only through daily inner works of transformation that we become eligible for the divine marriage ceremony. And that is the marriage between our soul and the heavenly Baranach, or the heavenly Christ, the corporate Messiah, or the communion of saints. So let's take a look at the next aspects. If you want to learn more, you can go back online to YouTube page and look for part 1 of Mar Yeshua's Inner Halakah. Now we're going to talk about the next steps. A very important thing that we've talked about before and that we're highlighting today is what's called Shalak. And Shalak means a release, to release something. And I deem it as spiritual release. So a very easy way to understand Shalak is from the Lord's Prayer. It's commonly translated as, "Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us." Another modern way of putting this is, "Release us of the consequences of our mistakes as we release others of the minor and major offenses they have committed against us." In this tradition which I represent, we don't really talk about forgiveness too much. Even in this, God is almighty, but God cannot forgive us if I hurt somebody. If I hurt my friend, only my friend can forgive me. So you can only seek forgiveness from the person you hurt, but God cannot give forgiveness. Unless you've directly offended God, then God can forgive you for something you've done against God itself. But if I've hurt somebody, if I punch my best friend because I'm upset at him, only he can forgive me for punching him. God cannot forgive me for something that I've done to another conscious entity. However, God the Almighty can release us from the negative consequences of our negative actions. God can release us from the so-called negative karma that results from our negative thoughts, words, and deeds. So Shalak is a type of spiritual release. A spiritual release from debt. Spiritual debt owed to a person, owed to humanity, owed to the planet, owed to God and the heavenly spheres. So release implies that you're not going to retaliate. If somebody hurts you, I'm not going to try and hurt them back. I'm not going to try and get even. So Shalak implies non-retaliation, non-violence, a total lack of desire for vengeance or revenge, which actually is quite uncommon. When I was first ordained to be a priest, I got an email from somebody asking me to pray that God kill, in a very painful way, their enemy. So, sadly enough, people that are still seeking the true teachings of Mar Yeshua, the Master Jesus, still have very violent minds. So one might say, oh, we shouldn't even have to learn this. It's a very deep teaching. that whenever we actually do it, it really does purify and spiritualize our heart. It verily makes us divine. It makes the soul divinized. Because it's not just saying, oh, I forgive you, and then holding something in your heart against somebody. It's actually totally releasing them to the extent that when you think about how you were hurt, how you were offended, that you have no emotional reaction whatsoever. You look back on it and you think, oh, that occurred. It is a fact. And it was hurtful at the time, but now I'm free of it. That is the end result of spiritual release. What are we releasing? We are releasing hob. Hob is the word that means debt in Hebrew. And debt is incurred through sin or mistakes that we have committed against God, humanity, and Mother Nature. So we are asking God to release us of the consequences of our negative actions in the same manner, in the same way that we release others of the negative consequences of their offenses against us. This is a covenant or a divine spiritual agreement. It's like a legal contract with God, is how it was thought of in Judaic times. Let's look into this more deeply. So Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5, it says, do not judge, so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye, while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. So in the sense of Shalak, it's really the first two verses that really matter the most. Do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. So here is the concept of Shalak, or spiritual release. If you judge somebody else, if you decide to become the judge, jury, and executioner of those who offend you in some way, or hurt those that you love, to the same extent that you judge and convict others, God will hold you equally accountable for your negative consequences against humanity, God, and the earth. So we have to be very careful. If we judge others, the only way that the impersonal aspect of God can teach us not to judge is to let us feel the full force of our judgment against ourselves. And when we release people of the consequences of their negative action, when we don't hold it up against them, when we don't seek to retaliate or seek revenge, God likewise releases us of our hope, of our debt, in equal measure. So how merciful and compassionate we are to others is how merciful and compassionate God will be with us in regard to our own debt, hope, negative consequences due to our own negative thoughts, words, and actions. So very important. How we forgive others is how we'll be forgiven, is how it is modernly thought. But the better understanding is how we release others of the consequences of their negative actions towards us will be how God releases us from negative consequences we have incurred with creation and with God. It's very spiritually purifying to release somebody of negative action. That is Shalak, part of the inner Halakah teachings of Mar Yeshua. So Shalak is also about tolerance, about understanding that people are on different levels. Perhaps we're on a spiritual level that is higher than others. Maybe, right? If that's really true, then we should be able to say like Mar Yeshua, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Release them, for they know not what they do. If we are truly spiritually mature, we'll be able to say this without any vibration, inkling, or hint of a desire for comeuppance. In Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 22, then Peter came and said to him, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. Not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. This should not be taken literally. Jesus is not saying, literally, count 77 and then they're out the door, hit the road, Jack. What 77 means is that you forgive people infinitely. It's an infinite amount of forgiveness and tolerance we have for those that offend us. How can we expect God to forgive us or spiritually release us of our debt for an infinite amount of mistakes we make in our lifetime, for an infinite amount of mistakes that we make in a day? How can we expect God to forgive us if we're not willing to forgive others? So here, Mar Yeshua is teaching part of his inner Halakah, or inner teachings on Shalak, spiritual release. Not 7 times, I tell you, but an infinite amount of times. You should have infinite tolerance. And of course, this doesn't mean to, slap me around and beat me up and accept emotional, mental, physical abuse. That's not what it's about. This is about an internal reality. If somebody is hurting you mentally, physically, emotionally, by all means, distance yourself. You don't need to physically associate with them. You don't need to become a doormat for anybody. This is an inner teaching, not an outer teaching. So you shouldn't get the two mixed up. As an inner teaching, within our hearts, within our minds, we should be willing to forgive people or release them infinitely. Have infinite tolerance as God has infinite tolerance for each of us. That is this teaching on Shalak. Next, Matthew chapter 6, verses 14 and 15. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. And this is the covenant of Shalak that Mar Yeshua taught. For if you release others of their trespasses, your heavenly Abba, Father, Mother, God, will also release you. But if you do not release others, neither will your Abba release your trespasses. So, there is no such thing as the sacrament of forgiveness of sins. There are 2 ways in which you can truly be forgiven if you want it. Ask the person you hurt to forgive you. And number 2, release as many people in your life as you are capable of, up to all of them, of every negative consequence they are due for negative actions they've done against you. Forgive everybody. Release everybody. To the extent that you quote-unquote forgive or release others is the extent that you will be forgiven or released by God. If you do not release others, if you hold it against your mom all your life, or your dad all your life, or your your ex-husband all your life, or your kid that hurt your feelings, if you hold it against them forever, God will also hold your mistakes against you forever. To the extent we release others is the extent we will be released of our hub, of our debt, of our hata, sin. We come to the next aspect of Mar Yeshua's inner halakah, or inner teachings, which is called tifla. Tifla is intercessory prayer. There are different kinds of Jewish prayer, but in the Christian Testament, the only kind that Mar Yeshua was noted as having taught was tifla, or intercessory prayer for others. Intercessory prayer for the Christian community and for humanity in general. Mar Yeshua taught his disciples to pray not for themselves, but for others. He taught us to pray privately. He taught us not to pray publicly, loudly, or in a manner that can be characterized as showing off. He taught us to pray selflessly, not selfishly, merely treating the Abba as a gift giver or wish fulfiller. Prayer on an individual level is for seeking God and for pleasing God, for giving thanksgiving. It is not for self-benefit or self-aggrandizement. Prayer is both inner and secret halakah. We're going to talk about the inner halakah of tifla now, and in future weeks, we'll talk about the secret aspects of tifla. So Mar Yeshua mostly taught, the biggest ideas is that it should be private, and it should be done for others. And also you'll see that Mar Yeshua taught that it shouldn't be verbose or poetic. You shouldn't be trying to impress God. God is the greatest thing there is. He is the supreme consciousness. She is the creatress of the universe. You're not going to impress God. The only thing that melts God's heart is our love for the Abba. Selfless love for the Abba. When we seek God out of pure love and not just because we want something. It's not that we can't pray for good health or for the health of my husband, or the health of my children, the health of my friends. We can pray for our own needs. However, it exhibits a lack of faith. What Mar Yeshua taught is that God knows our every inner thought, and thus he'll provide our every need. The phrase is, loosely paraphrased, seek God first, and all things shall be added unto you. So if you focus just on seeking God, on merging your individual consciousness with the consciousness of God, then everything else along the way, money, health, love, protection of your family members and your loved ones, all of that comes as secondary gain to the priority of seeking God. And that's what tifla or prayer is for, to uplift all of humanity and to seek God, to give thanksgiving for God's blessings that the Abba freely gives to all. Matthew chapter 6, beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. And later on in the same chapter, and whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Abba, who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. I will let this picture stand for itself. These verses directly not only speak of the ancient Pharisees, which Jesus criticized, but it speaks of modern evangelists and people who do this to a lesser degree. Prayer should be private. Prayer should be in the privacy of a church, temperately done within a synagogue or a mosque, as a group of a spiritual family seeking God together. But it should never be done to be seen, to coerce, to try and manipulate people to become like you are, to make people believe like you believe. It is a show, and they have their reward. Matthew chapter 6 also describes tifla, intercessory prayer. When you are praying, do not heap up empty phrases, as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Let's pause there. Historically, I don't believe that Jesus said, as the Gentiles do. Matthew is known as being the most Jewish of the Christian Testament Gospels. So it has the most Jewish thought and Jewish beliefs within it of all the canonical Christian Testament Gospels. Jesus was for everybody. He did not separate Jew from Romans, from Greeks, from Africans, from Egyptians, from anybody. Jesus was preaching to humanity. However, he preached to those closest to him. He preached to the Jews because he was a Jewish Rav, a Jewish master. Here he's just saying, when you pray, don't heap up empty phrases and flowery poetry. You're not impressing anybody. And you don't need to pray and tell God every detail. Oh, well, I need help with this and that and the next and the other. Because the Abba knows what you need before you ask him. Because the Abba is omniscient and is omnipresent. So, Mar Yeshua was saying the best prayers are concise, heartfelt, love-drenched words of thanksgiving. That is what moves God's heart. Not flowery poetry, not great speakers. Sometimes the best prayer is to sit in silence with love in your heart, with tears streaming down your face. Tears are the best prayer. Love overflowing from your heart to God in the sense of joy is the best prayer. Offering your very soul to God in silence is often the best prayer. But Mar Yeshua's disciples asked him, how do we pray though? If words are to be spoken, how should we pray? And Mar Yeshua continues in chapter 6 of Matthew, verse 9. Pray then in this way, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. This is from Matthew chapter 6. The very first part outlines what Tifla is. Our Father in heaven. It's not saying, my Father in heaven. You're praying as a group. This is a prayer to be done as a group, as a spiritual community, for the benefit of all humanity. Not just Christians, but it's to benefit all humanity. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Our Father in heaven, we bow down lovingly to you. Your kingdom come. We've talked a lot about kingdom. The word here would be malkuth. So the Aramaic understanding of this would be, your sovereignty come, your rulership come, your kingship come in my heart. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. As all the choirs of angels sing joyfully to God and serve God with pure love and make his every will complete and done, may that be the way it is here on earth. May earth be another divine realm instead of the purgatory that it currently is. Give us this day our daily bread. The Greek word for daily bread is epiousion, which means future bread, or the bread of the morrow. So, no spiritual seeker would be asking for bread alone. We're asking for spiritual sustenance. Give us this day our spiritual sustenance. Give us the bread of the morrow means give us the spiritual nurturance of the Olam Haba, the world to come, the heavenly realm that we ascend to when we become perfect. I want a taste of that now. Give us the bread of the morrow. Give us our spiritual sustenance so that we can seek the bread of the morrow, the joy of heaven. Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. That's Shalak. Release us of our debts, our hub, our sin, to the same extent that I have released, that we have released our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. So this phrase presents the evil one, presumably as Shaitan, or Satan. I prefer it as, do not bring us to the time of trial or test, but rescue us from all evil. Both within our hearts, as the Yetzer Hara, and without, as those that may want to hurt us. In whatever kind of body, invisible or visible bodies. The time of trial is not judgment day. The time of trial is when God tests us. Anytime a spiritual seeker says, hey God, I'm serious about seeking you. I want to do your will on earth as it is in heaven. The moment you say that, God is going to test you. God will never tempt you. God does not tempt. James says that in his epistle. God does not tempt, but God will test you to see if you're sincere by creating appropriate circumstances in your life to see if you prioritize God first or just the mundane world first. Will you choose to come to worship, to seek to understand God, or will you go out to lunch, sleep in, or go out for a beer? God will definitely test us and put us to trial if we say we're seeking him. If somebody isn't even seeking God, he's not even going to test you because he knows you're not even ready. But if you say, I'm ready, Lord, I'm here, I want to learn, I want to seek you, I want to merge my soul in you, I want to perfect myself so I can become part of the communion of saints, the Baranash, new humanity, second Adam. If you say that, God's going to say, okay, All are welcome, but let's see if you're really serious about this. So here in this last statement, do not bring us to the time of trial. That means, please give me the grace of being spiritually mature. May your tests be light. May I pass those tests and rescue me, us, from all evil, both within and without. So everything in the Lord's Prayer or the Master's Prayer is our. It's we consciousness. I'm not praying for myself and my selfish desires and wishes, no matter how good those wishes may be in the relative sphere. But I'm praying for we, for all of humanity. So again, the Lord's Prayer is not just Christians praying for Christians. It is so-called Christians or disciples of the Master Jesus praying for humanity. This is how the old humanity ends and is rebirthed into the new humanity, soul by soul, simply by doing Mar Yeshua's outer, inner, and secret Halakah. Halakah means way, walk. It is the rabbinic teachings of a Jewish Rav or master. We, not I. All prayer should be for we, the collective goodness, the collective humanity. And we should trust that God knows what's best for us and what we need, that we don't even need to ask for it, but He already knows the need before you ask, before you speak it, before you think it. That is a true son or daughter of God that prays in such a way. And it's extremely purifying to the spiritual heart and to the mind when we don't pray selfishly, but we pray for others. Anytime we attempt to expand beyond ourselves, beyond our personal needs, beyond our personal comfort, for the benefit of others, for the benefit of humanity, that is exceptionally transformative, exceptionally purifying, exceptionally sanctifying of the heart and mind. Kihesh, we're only going to go over this very briefly. About a month ago, we did a long talk on Kihesh, non-attachment. So please look that up on YouTube if you would like, for the talk on Kihesh. But just briefly, Kihesh is part of the inner Halakah of Mar Yeshua for the purification of heart and mind. So the main idea of Kihesh is not that you don't own anything, that you give up all of your money, all of your resources, all of your houses. Currently in this modern age, that's not appropriate. It may have been appropriate in Mar Yeshua's time because historically we do see that voluntary poverty was observed by those that walked with Mar Yeshua as he taught his basur, or his proclamation. And we also see voluntary poverty in the early churches. But nowadays, it's no longer appropriate for many reasons that you can guess. I mean, just look at some of these big churches online and on TV. These preachers have these huge, expensive places that they teach in. They have like 10 Rolls Royces, 5 houses, mansions across the world. That's why you don't give your money, your house, and your belongings to some preacher in today's world. Don't do it. But Kihesh does mean that we should give freely, with no caveats, no expectations, no agendas. In Luke chapter 6, verses 29 to 31, we find, when someone steals your coat, give them your shirt as well. Give to anyone who asks you. When someone takes what is yours, do not demand it back. In all these circumstances, Mar Yeshua is teaching us to not grasp at material things. That the real thing that we're seeking, that we need to grasp onto, is God. So if somebody steals your coat, don't fight him. Give him your shirt. If somebody asks something of you, give it to them. Commonly, I walk down my city streets and sometimes somebody might come up and ask us for money. And my roommate will say, oh, we can't give to that person. I see him in the streets all the time. He has the same problem for 5 years. What does it hurt to give them a penny? You know? Sometimes we can't really know if the person asking really needs it, or will use it responsibly. What is more important than trying to figure out the intention of somebody that is begging on the street, or that claims that they need something for food, or to get to safety? It's about us being willing to help that person. We may not be able to know if they'll be honorable with what we give them, but it purifies our heart if we give with compassion, if our heart melts at somebody in need. That is what purifies. When someone takes what is yours, do not demand it back. So if somebody takes something from you, rather than going and fighting with them, just say, go on, keep it. In other words, you're practicing non-attachment. If you have money, do not lend it at interest, but give it to one from whom you will not get it back. Isn't this an interesting statement? We find it in the Gospel of Thomas, Halakah 95. If you have money, do not lend it at interest, but give it to one from whom you'll not get it back. So a lot of people will lend money to others, but say, if I give you $100, then you owe me $150. And of course, this is very well known of banks and lending institutions. Jesus was very much against usury. This is not the only statement Jesus has about usury, which means charging interest for a loan. But here, Jesus goes even a step further than just speaking badly about usury. He says, if you have money, do not lend it at interest. Do not seek something for yourself to get something back, but give it to somebody who you know you won't get it back from. In other words, give it to a homeless person. Give it to a charity that does work that you respect. Give it to a spiritual or educational institution that will use it for the betterment of the world. Give your money, give your surplus money to someone or some entity from which you will not get it back. Still to this day, this is accurate as one of the best ways of practicing kihesh, or non-attachment. Most of us are most attached to money. A lot of people will say, well, why should I donate to a church? Why do you need flowers in a church? Or why do you need candles in a church? Or why do you need incense in a church? Why do we need a church at all? Why can't we just pray? Does God really need offerings? Does God really need a church? No. All these things, the church, the candles and the incense that create a mood, anything that might be within a church is for your benefit. To make you comfortable in a spiritual atmosphere filled with spiritual vibrations that transform and uplift the soul for a week of spiritual seeking inside your closet, inside your heart. What humans most identify with is their money. To give away money to support a spiritual cause or somebody that is in need is the best way to give away your ego. It's the best way to dissolve your ego. How do we identify ourselves? I am eknat. I am a priest. I am a this or that. I am a doctor. We identify most with what we do, and what we do has different rates of earning money. So many people will consider somebody that cleans the streets, that their work is less valuable than, say, a doctor. But everybody's work is equal. But those who are paid more because of their status in life or their job often have bigger egos than people that have so-called lower jobs. Right? So give to one from whom you'll not get it back. A great way of destroying the human ego, destroying our attachments both to thoughts and outside things. Let him who has grown spiritually wealthy be sovereign, and let him who possesses worldly power renounce it. Gospel of Thomas, once more, Logian 81. Let him who has grown spiritually wealthy be sovereign, and let him who possesses worldly power renounce it. So one who has grown spiritually wealthy is one who seeks God, one who seeks to do God's will on earth as it is in heaven, one who does outer compassionate works to uplift the vulnerable, one whose heart is pure from observing this inner Halakah we've been talking about for 2 weeks. Let him who has grown spiritually wealthy or spiritually mature be sovereign, be the ruler of his own reality. That's the greatest wealth we can have, is to be sovereign, the ruler, the king of our own bodily, mental, and emotional kingdoms. That's the greatest wealth we can have. All other wealth will drain away or be spent. Here today and gone tomorrow. Jesus is urging all of us to become spiritually mature, spiritually wealthy, so that we can be the king of our own minds and hearts, have control over ourselves, so that we can perfect ourselves, so that we become shalom, whole, tam, perfect, so that we may become a Christ in flesh. Let him who possesses worldly power renounce it. That's how you become spiritually mature. Let him who possesses worldly power renounce it. So kihesh isn't only about giving up money or being non-attached to things. It's about being non-attached to ideas about who I am. Who am I? Anything that we might say is attached to the ego. If I must be anything at all, if you must claim to be anything at all, claim, I am a child of God. I am a child of God. And let that be our only claim. Let our only attachment be to God and to the spiritual master, Mar Yeshua. That is kihesh. Amen. Amen.